What if I told you that buying the wrong franchise could trap you for the next 10 years, where you can't sell it, you can't scale it, and you can't even step away from it? And yet people make this exact same mistake every day. They think they're buying a business, but really they're buying a box with no exit. And I've watched it happen too many times, where six-figure investments turn into full-time headaches, all because the buyer didn't understand one simple concept: optionality. And so in this video, I'm going to walk you through my triple option strategy for franchise ownership that helps avoid these traps, giving you the option to sell the business, step out of the operations, or scale an empire, all depending on what makes sense for you at that time. So if you want to follow along, I put together a free triple option checklist to help you evaluate any franchise before you buy. The link to that is in the description. So first off, why is optionality so important? If you think about a quarterback in football, in a triple option, the quarterback keeps the ball with them, and instead of scripting out exactly where they're going to go and what they're going to do and when, they keep the ball and they wait to evaluate where the defense lines up, who's open, etc. And the three options they have are to keep the ball themselves, or to pitch the ball to the running back, or to hand it directly off to the fullback. So you want that same kind of optionality in franchising, because no matter what your short-term plans are, you should always keep options on the table. So in franchising, the triple option play is number one, exit, which is to exit the business to sell it to somebody else. Number two, executive ownership, which is to own the business without running the day-to-day. And empire, which is to scale a multi-unit portfolio that presumably will lead you to having a bigger exit down the road. And so the ideal franchise opportunity gives you all three options. And it means just like the quarterback with multiple plays, you get to call the shot when the time is right. So anytime you step into a franchise that shuts down one of these options, that's a red flag. And here's what you're going to watch out for. So taking these one by one, we're going to start with exit. And I do want to clarify, because pretty much everybody is going to want to exit their business at some point. But sometimes people want to exit their business sooner than what they had planned. Maybe you simply don't like the business and don't want to dedicate the time that it's going to take to get it to the next level. Or maybe you have another opportunity you'd like to pursue instead, and you can't do that simultaneously while owning this franchise. Regardless of the situation, there are a few things to watch out for that can either enhance or inhibit your ability to exit the business early without losing your shirt. So this can happen when, first of all, the business just simply isn't making enough money. And a lot of people, when they're trying to understand the financial performance of a franchise, they really focus on breaking even. And while breaking even is obviously a key inflection point in the business's growth, it has to do more than just be cash flow positive. It needs to be profitable enough to be worth more as a multiple of earnings than it cost you to start, because otherwise it's going to be very, very challenging to recoup the value that you've already sunk into the franchise, especially if you're doing so earlier than you had planned. Another thing to watch out for is, how does the franchisor present themselves? And while you shouldn't choose a franchise just because they have a slick sales presentation, when you're going through a discovery process, you should consider the fact that eventually your buyer will be going through the same process that you are. So you should be thinking about, are they presenting the brand in a way that you feel like will help maximize your exit value one day when you go to sell? And then another thing to watch out for that can make exiting early really challenging is if there's just not a lot of growth in the system or not a lot of energy behind it. Because if there are a lot of people interested in getting into that franchise system, chances are one of them will be interested in buying your business simply because of the law of velocity. And another factor here is geographic isolation. So if you're the only location within a 200-mile radius, that can be more challenging to sell, because as we'll talk about later, one of the best ways to grow and scale as a franchisee is to acquire neighboring locations. And this is also great as a seller, because you get to sell to somebody who already knows the business. And so that likely will reduce the level of involvement needed from you during the transition process. And because they're already a franchisee, likely will not be a broker fee either. So in one of the franchises that I own, I've been on the other side of this equation, where I have bought out people who wanted an early exit. And some of them weren't making much money at all, but they were still able to get a decent outcome because it was in a franchise that had a lot of energy and growth behind it, a franchise where a lot of people, including myself, wanted to buy. So moving on to option number two, which is executive ownership. And this is what some people would call absentee or passive ownership. I never use the word passive to describe a small business, because no small business is passive. And anyone claiming that it is probably trying to sell you something. But usually what people mean by this is that they want to own a business without working in it on a day-to-day basis while a manager or somebody else runs the operations. So some people try to do this from day one, and in 90+% of cases, I think this is a bad idea, because executive ownership is usually an achievable goal that you should be working towards, but can be a very challenging place to start, even if the franchisor says that it's doable. So if you're trying to go this route, please do reach out to me before you do. I don't want to see anybody else fall into this trap that happens far too often. But let's assume that you do start out working full-time in the business and you decide you want to buy a different franchise or start another business, or you want to relocate somewhere else, anything like that. Executive ownership could be a good outcome in those situations. So here are a few things to look for to ensure that this option is available. First, some franchisors don't allow for executive ownership. As crazy as it may sound, some franchisors restrict you from ever hiring hiring a manager and stepping out of the operations. They want to have franchisees who are full-time owner-operators for the duration of their ownership. And as I've shared before, I don't think that this is a good idea for anybody ever to sign up for. And the reason is, even if that's what you want to do, if you want to own and operate one business forever, that's perfectly fine. But you should be doing that because it's the best option that's available to you, not because you're contractually obligated to do so. So be sure to read the fine print and make sure that you are in a franchise that contractually allows for you to hire a manager and you have an off-ramp to being involved in the day-to-day operations down the road as the business matures. Another thing to look out for is that some businesses just don't make enough money to hire a manager. They're simply meant to be owner-operator businesses because maybe they earn some cash flow, but not enough to where you can hire a manager and there be any cash flow left for the owner. But then to add on to that, when you're trying to really optimize yourself out of the day-to-day operations, it elevates the standard of quality of the manager that you need. So you're going to have to pay someone more of a premium who has the capacity to operate that business with some level of autonomy. You're going to have to pay them more than if you were hiring a manager that you would continue to work alongside of, as an example. And then another thing to think about, and this is more internal than it is external, but you might be a control freak. If you're planning to hire a manager, you need to embrace the fact that nobody is ever going to care about your business as much as you do. And in a lot of cases, you're not going to be able to find somebody who can operate the business as well as you can. And so the question for you is whether or not you can accept the trade-off that comes with compromised performance in some areas in exchange for you not having to be nearly as involved. An example from my own career, my first franchise went very okay. I didn't love the business and it wasn't a brand that I wanted to double and triple down on, but I did have the ambition to grow. And so the saving grace in that business was that I was able to hire a manager and remove myself from the operations so that my opportunity cost of that business wasn't nearly as high as it would have been if I were stuck in the weeds indefinitely. Moving on to option number 3, which is the most exciting option, and that is empire. And most people that I work with to get into franchising are doing so because they want to build an empire. And while you're not always going to know if that's going to be a possibility within any given franchise, there are certain traits you want to look for that give you a strong indication that there's asymmetric upside to you being able to scale. First thing we're going to look out for, again, some franchisors limit your ability to build an empire. They may have restrictions, in addition to what we talked about, restrictions on hiring a manager. Some franchisors are going to have restrictions on you owning multiple units. And again, it's not a good idea. Even if you don't think that you're going to want that, you're going to want the option. And no franchisor is going to be neutral on empire builders. They're either going to really want them or they really do not want them. And so obviously, if you're going to build an empire or that's what you want to do, you're going to be looking for the former and not the latter. The other thing that we're going to look at is some of the franchise models out there just simply don't scale well, and they're not conducive to people who want to build multi-unit empires. Some businesses are just better fit for owner-operators and aren't super scalable. And this is the case with some, but not all of these lean mobile service franchises that are out there that are growing really quickly, whether it's in home services or some other kind of a service business. Just some of those are not built to scale, and that's reflected in how fragmented the industry is. And on that note, another red flag you want to look for is if nobody else in that industry has ever built an empire. And it's one thing if it's just nobody in that specific franchise has built an empire, because sometimes franchise systems need a little bit of time for them to scale and to mature. But if there's nobody that is running a business of scale in that industry, there's probably a reason why that's the case. So that's certainly something that you're going to want to gain clarity on. And frankly, I don't like to bet on myself being the first to do anything. That's why I like franchises. So you just want to gain a lot of clarity on that before you bank on that being an option. And then another thing to look out for is if you don't have enough territory up front, because without room to grow, you will hit a wall when it comes to developing new locations. And so this isn't always a deal breaker, because one of the most attractive ways to scale a franchise empire is to acquire existing locations. By definition, you can only do that if other people own those other territories at some point. But when you're building out your initial portfolio, presumably within one market, you want to make sure you have enough room to reach a certain level of scale. And so one way to think about this is to figure out the capacity of whatever your upper level of management is in this business model. Sometimes it's called an area manager, sometimes it's a regional manager. So for example, if you're looking at a franchise where an area manager can manage 4 units or so, and you're really trying to optimize things, it's going to make sense to have at least 4 territories, or even more if you're doing it in increments of 4, to make sure that you're utilizing that area manager or whatever the equivalent title is most efficiently. So let's wrap this up. And at the end of the day, the most valuable thing as a franchisee is options. Option to sell, option to scale, and option to step back. And when any of those paths get blocked, the business becomes riskier and less valuable. So optionality is value. And I help people evaluate franchises that align with their ideal options every day. And if you're ready to go, I'd be happy to help you find, evaluate, and fund the right franchise opportunity for you. So if you have a net worth of at least $250K and at least $100K in liquid capital, go to connorgroce.com/schedule to book an intro call and get started. And if you haven't downloaded it yet, grab my triple option framework through the link in the description. Also, if you find this valuable, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment letting me know what you'd like to hear next.